So before we begin this particular video, I guess this is a small, okay, maybe not small content warning. I will be reading from Fulgrim and Angel Exterminatus by Graham McNeil. They are not, they do really good in the Black Raspberry of not going too far with their descriptions, but for some people, this just might not be their cup of tea. We are going to go into when Fulgrim actually turns to the Dark Gods of Chaos, and then the telling of the Angel Exterminatus by Fulgrim, which has some details in it which might upset a few folks. But keep in mind, it is fiction, not a real story. So with that out of the way, let's get into it. Fulgrim saw the blazing spear hurtling towards him and swayed aside as its fiery heat slashed past his head. He laughed as he saw the Eldar god had disarmed itself. But the laughter died in his throat as he heard the voice in his head screaming a warning. Fool! You think the Eldar trickery is so easily thwarted? He turned to see the spear twisting in the air like a serpent, swooping back in a graceful arc towards him. It roared as it flew, the noise like the eruptions of 1,000 volcanoes. He brought up his sword and deflected the flaming missile, the heat of it passing a scorching on the skin of his face and setting the plaits of his hair on fire. Fulgrim beat his head with his free hand, extinguishing the flames in his hair, and raised his sword in challenge. Will you not fight me in honorable combat? Must you do your killing from afar? The monstrous iron creature plucked the flaming spear from the air, black smoke and spitting embers drifting from its eyes and mouth as it spun the weapon and aimed it at Fulgrim's heart. Fulgrim grinned as he felt the thrill of combat pulsing through every fiber of his being. Here was a foe that would truly test his mettle. For what being had he ever fought that had truly challenged him? The Lair? The Diasporex? The Greenskin? No. This was a creature with a power to match his own. A terrible godlike being that bore the heart of its fading race within its iron breast. It would not be baited or riled with petty insults. It was a warrior creature with one purpose and one purpose alone: to kill. Such a one-dimensional aspect made Fulgrim sick, for what was life and death but a series of sensations to be experienced one after another? Without sensation, what was life? A wild exhalation filled him, and his senses seemed to rise to the surface of his skin. He felt every tiny gust of wind as it wound past his body, the heat of the creature before him, the coolness of the planet's atmosphere, and the softness of the grass beneath him. He was truly alive, and at the height of his powers. Come on, then, snarled Fulgrim. Come on and die. The two beings leapt towards each other, Fulgrim's sword slashing down to meet the mighty creature's blade, which he was now resembled as a great sword where once had been a spear. Both blades met with a tearing shriek that echoed in the realms beyond those of the five senses, and an explosion of unlight that left those who saw it blinded. The roaring Eldar god recovered first, and its molten sword was aimed at Fulgrim's head. He ducked and slammed his fist into the midriff, feeling the hard impact on iron and the blistering heat that seared the skin from his knuckles. Fulgrim laughed writhed with the pain and raised his sword to block a murderous slash toward his groin. The Eldar god attacked with wild, atavistic fury, its blows driven by racial hatred and the ferocious joy of unbound emotion. Flames wreathed its limbs, and dark tendrils of smoke enveloped the two catacombs as they struggled. Silver sword and fiery blades sparked and clanged as they traded blows, neither able to penetrate the other's defenses. Fulgrim felt his anger at his blazing monstrosity surge in his veins, its inability to do more than simply fight and kill, offending his refined sensibilities. Where was its appreciation of art and culture, beauty and grace? Such a thing did not deserve the boon of existence, and his limbs filled with renewed strength, as though he found new power, flowed from his sword into his arm and into his flesh. He could hear the sounds of battle all around him. Bolter fire, cries of pain, wickering razor disc from alien weapons, and howling screams like the cries of the banshees of legend. He paid them no heed, too focused on his own fight to the death. His sword pulsed with a silver glow, streamers of light and power rippling along its length as he swung it, every strike delivered with a roar of ecstasy. The gleam of purple light from the pommel stone was strong, and he could see that the fiery gaze of his foe's eyes was ever drawn to it. A wild idea took root in his mind, and though a powerful surge of denial washed through him at the thought, he knew that it was the only way to defeat his enemy quickly. He stepped in close to the flaming Eldar god and hurled his sword high into the air. Instantly, its burning gaze snapped upwards, the coals of its eyes honing in on the spinning blade. It drew back its arm to hurl the spear at the sword, but before it could throw, Fulgrim leapt towards it and delivered a thunderous right hook to its face. Every ounce of his power and rage powered the blow, and he let loose a bellowing cry of hate as he struck. Metal buckled, and an eruption of red light exploded from the Eldar monster's head. Fulgrim's fist hammered through its helmet and into the molten core of its skull, and he cried out in agony and pleasure as he felt the blow smash from the back of its head. The wounded creature staggered, its head a twisted ruin of metal and flame. Spears of red light streamed from its helmet, and the molten rivers of its blood blazed like phosphor against its iron skin. Fulgrim felt the pain of his maimed hand, but savagely suppressed it as he stepped in again and wrapped his hands around its neck. The heat of its molten skin seared his flesh, but Fulgrim was oblivious to the pain, too intent on his foe's destruction. Plumes of red light streamed from the Eldar god's face, the sound like a manifestation of the combined rage and heart of its creators. An age of regret and lust flowed from the creature, and Fulgrim felt the aching sadness of the necessity of its existence pour into him, even as it poured out of the dying monster. His hands blackened as he crushed the life from his enemy, the metal cracking with the sound of a dying soul. Fulgrim forced the creature to its knees, laughing insanely as the pain of his wounds vied with the powerful elation he felt in the crushing of the life from another being with his own bare hands, and watching as the life fled from its eyes. The sound of a great and terrible thunder built, and Fulgrim looked up from his murder to see a graceful bird of fire carve its way across the heavens. He released his hold on the dying Eldar creature and punched the heavens as the firebird streaked overhead, followed by the host of stormbirds and thunderhawks. Fulgrim returned his gaze to his defeated foe as whipping light and noise poured from it like the nuclear fire and blaze of a heart of a star. The light of the creature's death flared, and its body exploded in a thunder of hot iron and molten metal. Fulgrim was hurled through the air by the screaming explosion and felt the touch of its power sear the armor and his skin. The released essence of a god surrounded him. He saw a whirling cosmos of stars, the death of a race and the birth of a bright new god, a dark prince of pleasure and pain. A name formed from the raw sounds of ages past, a bloody pain of birth and the wordless shout of unbound sensation, building into a mighty roar that was a name and a concept all at once. Slaanesh. 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 Even as the name formed, Fulgrim slammed into the ground and laughed as the Emperor's children descended to Tarsus on wings of fire. He lay still, broken and burnt, but alive. Oh, how he was alive. He felt hands upon him and heard voices begging him to speak, but he ignored them. Suddenly feeling an aching longing seize him as he realized he was unarmed. Fulgrim pushed himself unsteadily to his feet, knowing that his warriors surrounded him, but not seeing them or hearing their words. His hands throbbed and he could smell the scorch of ruin of his flesh. But all his attention was fixed on the still silver glow that was the split in the night. His sword stepped upright in the glass, its blade having come down point first after he had hurled it into the air. It shimmered in the darkness, the silver blade reflecting the light of the firebird and the descending assault craft. Fulgrim's hands itched to reach out and grip the sword once more, but a screaming portion of his mind begged him not to. He took a faltering step towards the weapon, his hand outstretched. He could not remember consciously ordering it to do so. His blackened fingers trembled, and his muscles strained as though forcing their way through an invisible barrier. The siren song of the sword was strong, but so was his will, and what remained of his vision of the dark god's birth stayed his hand for a moment. Only through me will you achieve perfection. The words thundered in his head, and memories of the battle surged powerfully in his mind. The fire and the hunger to kill, and the wondrous elation of a god's death by his own hands. In that moment, the last vestige of his resistance collapsed, and he slid his fingers around the hilt of the sword. Power flowed through him, and the pain of his wounds vanished, as though from the most powerful of healing balms. Fulgrim stood straighter, his momentary weakness forgotten, as though a wash of power suffused every atom of his body. He saw the Eldar fleeing through their shimmering gateway until only the treacherous Seer, Eldrad Uthran, remained, standing forlornly beside the arching structure. The seer shook his head and stepped into the light, which vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. "My lord," said Vespasian, his face smeared with blood. "What are your orders?" Fulgrim's anger at the alien's perfidy reached new, undreamed of heights, and he sheathed his sword, turning his face to his gathering warriors. He knew there was only one way to ensure that the treachery of the Eldar was burnt out forever. "We return to the pride of the Emperor," he said. "Order every ship to make ready to fire a spread of virus bombs." "Virus bombs?" asked Vespasian. "But surely only the War Master—" "Do it," shouted Fulgrim. "Now!" Vespasian looked uneasy with such an order, but nodded stiffly and turned away. Fulgrim cast his gaze out over the night-shrouded planet before him and whispered, "By fire, I swear that every one of the Eldar worlds shall burn." Hey friends, it's me, the Ebony Attacker, the well-rounded nerd. We gotta have a good reading for Halloween. Are you even kidding me? And only one of our Primarchs is worthy of Halloween, and that would be Fulgrim. A couple of years ago on my channel, I actually did, or was it last year? I can't remember. It was last year or the year before. I read the Meraviglia from Fulgrim. And Fulgrim, of course, is written by Graham McNeil. Thank you, sir. And Black Library. Please don't come for me. I'm never going to read a whole book. I love you. Love me back. But I read the Meraviglia from Fulgrim. And that is when Serena de Angelis creates the symphony that basically lets Slaanesh run wild amongst the Emperor's children in the concert hall, and all hell breaks loose, literally. And it's the murder symphony. Yeah, good thing I'm not fully monetized yet, because none of these words I'm saying will YouTube like. But hey, it's part of the story. Halloween. But I read that, and one year I also did the Angel Exterminatus soliloquy that Fulgrim gives when he tricks Perturabo in the novel Angel Exterminatus, the 23rd book of the Horus Heresy, into building him an amphitheater for the sole purpose of telling the tale of the birth of an Eldar god. But at the time, I guess spoiler warning, go read these books. They're awesome. There's so much, you can't spoil it all. But at the time when Fulgrim is telling the tale of the Angel Exterminatus, what he's really telling Perturabo is, I want to be the Angel Exterminatus. I want to be that. I want to be a dark god of chaos. Perturabo doesn't pick up on that. Perturabo just thinks Fulgrim has a flair for the dramatic and that there's some crazy weapon that they are after. And Fulgrim himself is trying to turn himself into a weapon. And where I failed when I did my readings of Fulgrim was to connect those back to when did Fulgrim turn? Because there's always a moment for every Primarch, every legionary, every human who turns to chaos. What did it? What was the catalyst, the moment, that made it happen? And this was the moment when Fulgrim grasped the sword and can hear the literal voice of Slaanesh in his head. And he's able to fight it off because he's heard it for a while. It's been in his head since he went into the Laren temple and grabbed that imbued sword. It's been there. It's just been a thought, though, in the back that he's been able to quiet the thoughts. But in that battle with an Eldar god on an Eldar world, he let Slaanesh take hold. The feeling of power and pleasure that he gets from being a denizen of Slaanesh is greater than anything the Emperor could ever offer him. And he gives himself over to chaos. Because that's the thing about chaos. Chaos is gentle. Chaos is a neutral evil. Honestly, I think they're a neutral on chaos exists. Chaos is in the warp being chaos. The Emperor kicked in their door. And they said, oh, so you want to play on our side of the fence? Hey, I agree with Sister Xavier. I cannot remember her name to save my life. But y'all know Deadpool. Spoilers, go watch Deadpool. But she said, I was happy in my dimension over here just doing my thing. And you came and peed on my side of the fence. We had an agreement. I want the universe now. That's Chaos's position. The Emperor kicked in their door. And by kicking in their door, the Emperor laid the foundation for whatever imperfection might be in his Primarchs, because the Primarchs are still human, barely. I mean, like, they have human faces, I guess. They are genetically modified to the max, but their core is still human. Their spirit is still human. They still have a tinge of humanity in them. And that is what Chaos exploits, that bit of them that is still human, and their ignorance and their basest desires. And that's what I love about the stories of Warhammer, is because it gives us a picture of no matter how mighty and great someone might be, they're still human. And if there's one thing humans will always do, is disappoint you. Can't help ourselves. But to wrap up these readings for Halloween, now that we know the moment that Fulgrim fell, let's revisit his soliloquy in the Angel Exterminatus, where he basically gives his villain speech. But Perturabo does not catch that it's his villain speech at the time. Shall we? Yes, I think we shall. Reading from Angel Exterminatus, the 23rd book of the Horus Heresy, written by Graham McNeil. Starting in the 6th chapter, Mer Shael Atheraika, a shot in the dark. The tale belonged to Karuchi Vor's race, but it was Fulgrim who took center stage to tell it. Never at ease with others sharing the limelight, the Phoenician had become narcissistic to the point of egomania, Perturabo saw. He watched Fulgrim as he circled theatrically, the great actor promenading before, delivering his greatest soliloquy. Fulgrim took up a heroic pose, more like an actor pretending to be him than himself. Brothers and sisters, began Fulgrim with a deep bow. I come before you all to tell a tale of forgotten days, of lost empires, and an age of the galaxy before the rise of mankind. We rule now where an ancient race once claimed dominion, and though it declines to its inevitable doom, there are still remnants of its empire's lost glory in the secret places of the galaxy. Listen well, and I will transport you through the mist of time to the last days of this decadent race. Fulgrim's words were delivered with panache and the precise variation in tone to hook the imagination of the audience. To Perturabo's ears, they were needlessly ostentatious and took twice the time to tell as was required. Whatever the story to come, Perturabo knew he could tell it with more economy and clarity. But those were two concepts Fulgrim appeared to have left behind in his headlong plunge into whatever obsession was driving him. He stood with his arms folded as Fulgrim stalked the stage like a prowling killer, his pallid flesh and ebony eyes sweeping the crowd as though searching for something. Fulgrim lifted one arm to the sky. We begin. In a time before time, when mankind was yet to crawl on his belly from the primordial waters to the mud of the shores. We were not yet worthy to inherit the mantle of the gods. For another race claimed that honor, and the universe does not permit more than one pantheon to name itself divine. The children of Asheron they were, wrought from the fiery flesh of their godhead, and cast into the galaxy like seeds from a plowman's hand. They called themselves Eldar. Their empire stretched from one side of the Monoceros ring to the other, from Perseus to the farthest sanctum reaches of Centaurus. Their empire was mighty and proud, for their gods had granted them the means to travel the length and breadth of their realm in the blink of an eye. The warrior kings, Elbenesh and Uthanesh, led their armies in wars of conquest that saw every foe who dared stand before them brought low. And yet, even with the eternity of the galaxy as their dominion, the selfish Eldar were not satisfied. Eldenesh wept for the emptiness of his playground, and Aisha, the whore goddess from whose bleeding loins the Eldar had sprung, shed bitter tears that brought fresh life to the galaxy. Her grief was a wellspring of creation that brought many new wondrous races into being, all for the amusement of her children. An act of such foolish indulgence that beggars belief. Perturabo watched Karuchi Vora as Fulgrim spoke, and though his hood was still raised, it was possible to see the effect the storytelling was having upon him. With each pejorative mention of the Eldar, a muscle in Vora's face would twitch, a nervous tick that would have been invisible to any perception, save for that of a Primarch. Whatever the audience might be feeling towards Fulgrim's tale, Vora was not enjoying it. Fulgrim circled the amphitheater, his voice mellifluous, a euphony of sound that was unwillingly drawing Perturabo into the web of characters and plots as Fulgrim gave name to Eldar heroes and kings, their great thinkers, and of course, their enemies. What drama would be complete without a nefarious evil to oppose? As all here know, power begets jealousy, and the king of the conquered Haresh-Silane race plotted and schemed in the darkest reaches of the galaxy. As Fulgrim gave name to this king, he stooped and rubbed his hands together, like a children's tale-teller making a pantomime of villainy. The effect was laughable. Yet the crowds and the tears responded with jeers and howls of outrage. Perturabo was dumbfounded at the reactions of his brother's manipulative words were having. Yet even he had to confess to a mounting interest in the legendary tale being woven around him. The armies of Haresh-Silane rebuilt in secret and scattered in dimensions beyond the reach of the Eldar, finally assembled and struck back at their conquerors. With their king at their head, the Haresh slaughtered the Eldar by the tens of thousands in battle that left entire regions of the galaxy uninhabitable for millennia. The Eldar were mighty, yes, and their warriors peerless, but the armies of the Haresh outnumbered the stars. And though each battle saw the dead number in the millions, it was but a drop in the ocean to the full might of their grotesque battle host. Fulgrim had by now unsheathed his sword, and the golden blade drew fresh gasps of astonishment and roars of approval. Fulgrim spun and leapt like a dancer, yet Perturabo saw the fierce skill in his every move, the lethal grace that had made his brother a matchless swordsman, beyond even the technical ability of Gilliman or the enraged purity of Angron. The Eldar were on the verge of defeat, and the gods wept to see their favored children so humbled. Once again, Eldanesh cried for his mother goddess to aid him, and she was shamed enough by his pleas to beg her brother husband, the war god Kaela Mensha Cain, to fight alongside the Eldar. Cain refused, for he had ever been jealous of Asheron's brood and relished the sight of their pain. But when Aisha offered him the sanctity of her once virgin flesh, the war god relented and took what she offered without heed for her life. No sooner had he planted his bloody sheed in Aisha's belly than a fiery avatar tore its way from her womb with claws of blood and hunger for destruction beyond even the war god's power to unleash. Perturabo felt the audience's terror at the idea of so monstrous a creature, though what the allegory of legend actually meant in terms of real history was impossible to tell. Aisha's death scream was her war child's birth scream, a battle cry that stilled to the very heart of the galaxy fear and echoes in the hearts of all who spill blood to this day. The Eldar knew this being as Ma'el Shaiel Athrakaia, a name unspoken by their race, but which lives in their withered hearts as a gnawing fear. What does this name mean, brother? Asked Perturabo. I know the tongue of the Eldar, but those words are unfamiliar to me. Fulgrim paused in the telling of his tale, his face a brittle mask that looked to be on the edge of violence at this interruption. It is an ancient name, my lord, said Karuchivora. One never spoken aloud. It means the beautiful eagle from hell that brings the end of all things, which translates imperfectly as the angel Exterminatus, finished Perturabo. Then might I continue? Snapped Fulgrim, still poised on the brink of hostility. Perturabo nodded, and Fulgrim slipped back into the tale as though he had not spoken. The angel Exterminatus joined the fight against the Haresh Selene, and mighty were the slaughters that reeked across the galaxy. Eldenesh welcomed its aid even as he realized his own cowardice had caused the death of his mother goddess. Ulthanesh was broken by the price they had paid for this newborn creature of destruction, a beautiful creature that inspired love and terror in equal measure. Truly, the angel Exterminatus was an Eldar demigod like no other, blessed with the most beguiling countenance, the greatest strength, and the highest intellect. What the gods knew, it knew, and what power they feared to wield, it unleashed with a song in its heart. While Uthanesh quailed at the power of the angel Exterminatus, Eldenesh grew to love the stink of blood in his nostrils, the smell of charred flesh, and the sight of carrion picking the flesh of the dead. He grew jealous of the power so casually wielded by the angel Exterminatus, and plotted to bring it to ruin once the war against the Haresh Selene was done. Yet, even as his people's enemies retreated in the face of the angel Exterminatus, Eldenesh's desire to utterly destroy the Haresh Selene grew to become an obsession. Only the total extinction of his foes would satisfy such a bloodlust, and he bade the angel Exterminatus to craft weapons that would wipe their worlds from time and memory. Blind to Eldenesh's madness, the angel Exterminatus agreed, and forged weapons of such power that the very concept drove those who learned of them to take their own lives rather than live in the galaxy where such things were conceived. Now, Perturabo's interest was well and truly snared. Whether this was embellished allegory or wild fantasy didn't matter. This was the heart of the matter, and the crux upon which his indulgence hung. To fashion such weapons was no little matter, said Fulgrim. And the angel Exterminatus was weakened by their creation, for much of its power was bound into their destructive hearts. Exhausted by its labors, it sank into a great slumber on an ancient battleground, leaving Eldenesh to revel in what it had created. But Eldenesh saw what the angel Exterminatus had wrought, and despaired, for he now understood that such weapons were an abomination. The veils of his madness parted, and he saw what he had become and what he had lost in quest of his victory. He summoned Ulthanesh to his side, and offering great prayers to Asheron, they sought to banish the angel Exterminatus to the netherworlds, beyond the walls of space and time, and consign it to the hells from whence it had been conceived. Sensing their intent, the angel awoke from its rest and fought back. Fulgrim hacked his words through the air as he spoke, each stroke theatrically desperate, as though he fought for his life against unseen opponents that were steadily wearing him down. Breathless and disheveled, Fulgrim dropped to one knee, his golden sword held out before him, a perfect rendition of beleaguered hero, bowed but unbroken. Perturabo had long since tuned out the more mythic elements of the tale, focusing instead on what the truth behind the legend might be. Fulgrim rose unsteadily to his feet, as though pushing against an invisible force that sought to keep him down. Such a battle had never been seen in the ages of the galaxy, and being with the power of a god assailed by its wayward heirs, and no mercy was to be found in their hearts as blood flowed, and the very warp and weft of the galaxy was torn asunder by the violence of their conflict. None now live who remember how long these demigods fought. But against the power of the angel Exterminatus, Eldenesh and Orthanesh could not hope to prevail. Both were driven to their knees and faced the final wrath of the very thing they had helped to create. But before the angel Exterminatus could slay them, Acheron himself intervened to save his foolish sons. The angel Exterminatus was a god, but Acheron had ruled the heavens for an age before it had sprung from Aisha's bloody carcass, and his power was terrible to behold. He finished what Eldenesh and Uthanesh had begun, and ripped the galaxy apart, folding the tortured skeins of space and time around the angel Exterminatus, and sealing it away in a prison from which there could be no escape, and no reprieve from the terror it had unleashed. Perturabo hid his scorn at such a deus ex machina ending to the legend. But as Fulgrim cast his eyes heavenward, he knew what was coming next. Behold, the ancient prison of the angel Exterminatus, screamed Fulgrim, thrusting his blade towards the fallout of racked clouds, though kilometers thick. A halo of light parted for them, long enough for the night's blackness to become visible. And in that slice of darkness, the ugly bruise of the star maelstrom. I have thoroughly enjoyed doing these readings for the month of October and Halloween. I hope you enjoyed them as well. I, of course, will continue to read things on my channel. Like I said, I've got content for years in my office, but I hope you enjoyed this exploration into just some stories that fit the time and season, and we'll pick back up with other things in the coming weeks and months. As always, please like, comment, and subscribe, and hopefully I see you in the next one.